of your revolution, whether it succeeds or fails, will be felt by all people in your situation. That's massively important, because you as a moral actor, first prop as moral actors, are prioritising their conceptions of what they think life is and applying that to all people. They're saying this is a universalised rule, and we will not, this is a universalised rule. We know this out of some like general epistemic certainty, which they've never proclaimed, but purely exists within their own heads. And we don't see why that's legitimate to get other people to do that, to speak on their behalf. Thirdly and finally, in terms of inconsistency of moral action, and this deals directly with Will's stuff on like the object and stuff. We said that when you take an action, you violate another person's right to life in prioritisation of your own economic dreams and ambitions, etc. We said that you reduce the sphere of normativity to pure power. You delegitimise your own moral claim because the value of which the good and bad have been judged on the criterion of power. You've reduced it into an amoral environment from which, firstly, they don't have an epistemic position to proclaim to us in any kind of meaningful, prescriptive way that they're right, but secondly, you place in goal power as the criterion from which all moral claims are taken, and invalidates their moral claim, and that's why we win this debate. We say it's different with democracy, where it's about the transfer of control to people. This is in terms of an economic reality which is firstly subjective in its effects, and secondly, we don't think that you have the validity as a moral actor to speak on behalf of everyone, especially when your actions, historically, the examples we've shown, are necessarily coercive. For all these reasons, we win this debate, and we're damn proud of it.
I thank Bryn for the speech, and great. Jack wants to summarise. Keep going.
Okay, Mr. Speaker. In contrast to Will Jones, I genuinely have never been more convinced that what I was about to say was right. Basically, I'm going to talk to you about three things. I'm going to talk to you first of all, quite boring, about efficacy, why we think leftists are quite good at running countries and why we think the incentives in this scenario is really great. Second of all, I'm going to talk to you about the legitimacy of killing in this circumstance. Finally, capitalism, the system of slavery, why bad, like, revolution, legitimate. First of all, 4 points of rebuttal. First of all, Bryn said, like, you know, you're making a moral claim and you're committing the naturalistic fallacy of deriving what from is. Like, we think ultimately all moral claims derive that to some degree. Like, it's just a case of making an assertion that I believe this is wrong. Like, presumably they accept that killing is wrong. In the same way we think that slavery is a complete destruction of your humanity in exactly the same way. Well, you know, you don't have the epistemological position to be able to tell whether or not this is legitimate. Three things. First of all, we think, like, obviously, like, you can't tell if a bullet is going to hit me necessarily, but you assume, because people are because you assume that it might be legitimate to assume that it might, and therefore it's legitimate to act in self-defense, even though there's a possibility that you might not necessarily be harmed. We think certainty would be a bizarre calculus. Second of all, like, we assume the system won't change overnight, and these people have been constantly harming you for a long time. We think in that circumstance they're going to keep harming you. Third response to this, like, ultimately, we're in the position of the Cartesian observer where we assume that this is a good position to have, and we assume we can tell where this would be efficacious. Like, obviously, we don't advocate it in every circumstance. That's why legitimacy, rather than like always do. Sit down. Third thing, you are forced to comply because you're saying to people they're betraying their own people. Like, they kind of are by opting into a capitalist system, Mr. Speaker. We think that in that circumstance where they're perpetuating harm against other individuals, that's legitimate. Fourth thing, this is an imposition on people. Two responses. First of all, don't care. Second of all, proper control can only be given to people wherein they have the means to access democracy. That includes having things like economic inequality, so they have reasonable levels of power within a society and reasonable levels of emancipation, as Will gave you, wasn't responded to. Right, okay, efficacy, very quickly. First up said, we only have one example. No, we don't. They said leftists can't run countries. Fernando Cardoso in Brazil, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, Michelle Bachelet in Chile, Rodrigo Chavez in Ecuador, all of which are capable of running completely valid states. Harish told me all of those examples. The second thing is that you can't form good government after a violent revolution, right? If we ignore pro-American propaganda and look at Cuba, where levels of equality and levels of healthcare are far higher than they are in places in the United States, like in that circumstance, I think it's perfectly capable for these places to be able to run perfectly valid governments, or at least ones that are better than the system at the moment. Because it's inherently comparative, right? Like it's not just saying, well, you know, would this be the optimal system? It's saying, would this be better than the system at the moment? We think it almost certainly would. The third thing is, like, we think it's conceded by them when they talk about, like, the incentives that you have to redistribute land. The incentive is to try and provide the system in which people want. Like, Will gave you this when he said, like, the incentive is always to try and provide good economic planning. Like, we think in that circumstance you're going to be able to do that. Right, morality. No. Okay, legitimacy of killing people. In terms of self-defense. Like, we accept that this is not a utility calculus. Like, by dint of humanity and the importance of humanity, it means that you can protect your own humanity when it is threatened, right? Like, we think that it is acceptable to kill to prevent your own death. They accept that when they talk about the value of life. We think equally, slavery involves the complete destruction of my humanity, forcing me to be an object subject to the arbitrary will of another human being. We think in that circumstance, or another system, we think in that circumstance that is similarly a destruction of my identity and a destruction of my humanity. Right? We think in that circumstance it's perfectly legitimate to do that. The second thing Will gave you is, like, even if people don't know that they're committing an awful lot of harm against you, but are doing so, it would still be legitimate for you to take action against them. If violent revolution is the means in which you can do it, we think in that circumstance it is legitimate. Will gives you the example of a zombie, which is a great example, but like equally, if a child is shooting in a playground but doesn't necessarily know what they're doing is wrong, doesn't mean it's not acceptable for me to take self-defense measures against that child, Mr. Speaker. Right, yeah, Bryn.
Okay, so how is it morally legitimate for you as a revolutionary to speak and act on behalf of people in killing people to prioritise your own personal views of economics versus life?
Several reasons. First of all, because it will lead to a better system for everybody overall. Second of all, because I am acting in legitimate self-defense of myself, which we accept would be legitimate even where like a possible utility calculus goes against that. Third of all, we think if you prioritise life or anything, you have to accept that in certain circumstances people are legitimate in protecting themselves, or they can protect. Like, third of all, like, we think capitalism is in and of itself an imposition on people. We don't see why their imposition is any better than better than ours. We think it's a lot worse because it leads to problems of systemic inequality. That's what first prop told you. The stuff about people starving. See summary. Okay, basically capitalism, system of slavery. 4 points on this. First of all, capital is completely undemocratic. People have different starting points, and their power is determined by the starting point that they have. I become a slave at the point at which I have to sell my labour with no other realistic option. We think that's particularly the case in cases of severe economic inequality, where people are forced into things like prostitution. People are forced into those exploitative labours wherein they are not capable of opting out. The second thing on this is that we don't think you can have real democracy within this system, because people internalise the values of the system because they make decisions within that system. Democracy ultimately is an illusion for two reasons. First of all, because it's controlled by and large by the wealth of elite who are capable of determining elections. We think it's no coincidence that every election in the United States is determined by people who can